She was 8 months pregnant and dreamed of rebuilding her family, but she was taken to an isolated place where the baby's father was waiting for her with another woman. Her best friend revealed the betrayal with a cruel smile on her face, and tied to the tracks, she watched her pain become a spectacle for thousands of strangers. If this story caught your interest, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and let us know what city you're watching from. Now, on with the story. Chloe never imagined that Monday in March would become the dividing line between who she was and who she would be forced to become. The morning began like so many others in New York City, with the bumper-to-bumper traffic on the Long Island Expressway and the constant noise of the city that never sleeps. She woke up with her hands resting on her round belly, feeling the gentle movements of the baby due in less than 3 weeks, 8.5 months pregnant, and each day felt like an eternity of waiting, fear, and hope, mixed in unequal measure. The small apartment in Queens still held the marks of a life that was supposed to have been different. Framed photographs showed a smiling, embracing, happy couple. There was one in particular that Chloe could no longer look at without feeling a sharp pain in her chest. She and Ryan at the Jersey Shore the previous summer, when everything was still perfect. He was hugging her from behind, their hands intertwined over her still flat stomach. Both of their eyes shone with that naive certainty that nothing could ever tear them apart. But those images already seemed to belong to someone else, to a Chloe who believed in promises and vows of eternal love. The current reality was very different, painfully different. Ryan, the baby's father, had changed completely in recent months. The affectionate and attentive man who had won her over with flowers, romantic declarations, and promises of a future together had given way to someone distant, cold, and often cruel. Chloe spent hours trying to understand when exactly the transformation began. Was it when she told him about the pregnancy? No. He seemed happy that day. He even cried. Maybe it was in the following weeks when the reality of fatherhood began to weigh on him. Or maybe, and this was what hurt the most, he had never been who she thought he was. They hadn't lived together for 2 months. Ryan left after an intense argument, taking only a few clothes and leaving behind a trail of hurt and unanswered questions. Chloe still remembered that day in painful detail. It was a Friday night, and she was cooking his favorite dinner, trying to create a special moment to talk about preparations for the baby's arrival. But Ryan came home late, with a distant look and poorly disguised irritation. When Chloe tried to hug him, he pulled away as if her touch burned him. The argument started over something trivial, a late bill, but quickly escalated into accusations and resentments that had been building for weeks. Ryan said things Chloe never imagined hearing from his mouth. He said he felt trapped, suffocated, that the pregnancy had ruined his plans. And then he just left, leaving Chloe alone in the empty apartment, crying on the kitchen floor, while dinner grew cold on the table set for 2. Since then, Chloe's life had become a lonely routine of doctor's appointments, sleepless nights, and unanswered questions. She worked from home as a freelance graphic designer, which was a blessing considering her ankles swelled so much she could barely fit into comfortable shoes. Her clients were patient with deadlines, which allowed her to manage the growing anxiety about the birth, about raising a child alone, about the uncertain future that awaited her. Chloe, pregnant and emotionally exhausted, spent hours trying to understand what had gone wrong. Where was the man who had knelt before her, asking for her hand in marriage at that restaurant in Midtown with a modest but lovingly chosen ring? Where was that Ryan who cried with emotion when he saw the positive pregnancy test, who kissed her still flat stomach and whispered promises of being the best father in the world? How could someone change so much, so fast? The phone buzzed that morning, pulling Chloe from her thoughts as she sipped the chamomile tea her mother insisted was good for calming her nerves. It was a text from Ryan. Her heart still skipped a beat when she saw his name on the screen, a confusing mix of hope, fear, anger, and a stubborn love that refused to die despite everything. The message was short and to the point. We need to talk. It's about the baby. Tonight. I'll pick you up at 8. It wasn't a request, it was almost an order, but Chloe chose to interpret it as a gesture of reconciliation. Chloe reread the message dozens of times throughout the day, trying to decipher the tone behind those dry, direct words. Could it be a reconciliation? Was he finally ready to step up and rebuild the family they had dreamed of together? Or would it be just another painful conversation about child support, scheduled visitations, and dividing responsibilities in a cold, businesslike manner? She desperately wanted to believe in the first option. Her maternal heart wished with all its might that the child she carried would grow up with a father present, have a united family, and not suffer from his parents' separation before he was even born. During the day, Chloe tried to work on a branding project for a coffee shop in Astoria, but concentration was absolutely impossible. She would open the design software, stare at the blank screen, and her mind would simply drift to the conversation she would have with Ryan that night. Would he apologize? Would he explain why he had been so distant, so cruel? She mentally rehearsed what she would say, how she would react to different scenarios, what arguments she would use to convince him to come back, to give them a chance to be a real family. Chloe called her mother Sharon, who lived in Elizabeth, New Jersey, and always had a word of support in difficult times. But this time she decided not to tell her about the meeting with Ryan. Her mother had already made it clear what she thought of him after the breakup, using words Chloe had never heard from the mouth of that usually so composed and polite woman. No, it was better to wait. If everything went well, if Ryan really wanted to come back, then she would tell her mother, and they could all start over. At 7 in the evening, Chloe began to get ready with a care she hadn't taken in weeks. She took a long bath, letting the warm water relax the tense muscles in her back that complained about the extra weight of her belly. She applied lavender-scented lotion, the same one she used when she and Ryan were still together, and he said he loved that scent on her. She chose a simple but pretty dress, a light blue shade that brought out her brown eyes, and had always earned compliments from Ryan in happier times. It was a dress that accommodated her belly well without looking sloppy. She put on a little makeup, trying to hide the dark circles that sleepless nights had left behind. A bit of blush on her pale cheeks, mascara on her lashes, a light pink lipstick. Nothing over the top, just enough to not look as tired as she felt. She took care of her brown hair that fell in natural waves over her shoulders, brushing it patiently until it shone under the bathroom light. She wanted to look beautiful for him, wanted Ryan to remember why he fell in love with her 3 years ago when they met in that digital photography class. Was it naive to think that a pretty dress and lipstick could fix months of distance and hurt? Maybe. Probably. But it was all Chloe had at that moment, this fragile hope that her appearance could awaken in him some memory of the love that once existed. When the intercom buzzed at 8 o'clock sharp, Chloe felt a knot in her stomach that had nothing to do with the baby. Her hands trembled as she grabbed her purse, checked that her phone was charged, that she had her keys, the prenatal card she always carried with her. She walked down the 3 flights of stairs slowly, one hand on the worn-out railing, the other supporting her belly, which seemed to grow bigger every day. Her body, heavy with pregnancy, complained with every movement. Her swollen feet protested inside the comfortable sneakers that were the only shoes that still fit. But she ignored the physical discomfort because the emotional anxiety was so much greater. Ryan was waiting in a car she didn't recognize, a dark sedan parked in front of the building with the engine running. It wasn't his old car, that beat-up red Honda Civic they had used for so many trips to the shore, to his parents' house in Allentown, for Sunday strolls in Central Park. This car was new, or at least newer, and Chloe wondered whose it was, if Ryan had managed to buy it, or if it was borrowed from someone. When Chloe got into the car, she noticed Ryan was different, not just in his appearance. Although he was wearing an outfit she had never seen, a black shirt made of a nice fabric that looked too expensive for what he usually wore. There was something in his eyes, a hardness she couldn't quite identify. A mix of determination and something darker, something that made her stomach churn uncomfortably. He barely looked at her as she settled into the passenger seat with difficulty, adjusting the seatbelt over her prominent belly. He just muttered a dry greeting, an almost inaudible hey, and started driving without waiting for her to get properly settled. Chloe tried to make small talk, to break the heavy silence that filled the car like a physical presence. She asked about his job at the logistics company, where he was a supervisor, She commented on the baby's movements, how strong he was, how he kicked her ribs at night, keeping her awake. She talked about her last appointment with the obstetrician, about how everything was fine with the baby, despite the emotional stress she was going through. Ryan's answers were monosyllabic, distant, almost automatic. Yeah. Cool. That's good. As if she were a stranger sharing banalities about the weather. Where are we going? Chloe finally asked when she realized they were leaving the bright, busy streets of Queens, getting on I-95, and then taking an exit that led to a less traveled, darker road she didn't recognize. The city lights faded behind them, replaced by spaced-out streetlights that created pockets of shadow between their yellowish halos of light. A place where we can talk quietly, Ryan answered, without taking his eyes off the road. His voice was so neutral, it sounded rehearsed, as if he were reciting a memorized line. Away from everything, away from the city noise. But why so far? Chloe insisted, the first real pang of fear starting to surface. Ryan, we're just talking about the baby. We don't need to go to the middle of nowhere for that. We can stop somewhere, a restaurant, a diner. He didn't answer this time. He just gripped the steering wheel tighter and accelerated a little more. Chloe looked out the window and saw they were entering what looked like an industrial area, with warehouses and depots rising like shadows against the night sky. There was no movement, no people, just the deserted road and those empty buildings that looked like they had been abandoned for years. Something in his tone set off an alarm in Chloe's head, but she pushed the fear to the back of her mind. This was Ryan, the man she loved, the father of her child. He wouldn't do anything to hurt her. Or would he? The car drove on for another 20 minutes until Ryan parked in an abandoned industrial area on the outskirts of Elizabeth, New Jersey. Empty buildings, warehouses with broken windows, unlit streets. The place looked like something out of a nightmare. Chloe felt panic begin to rise in her throat. Ryan, what are we doing here? Why can't we talk in a coffee shop, somewhere public? He finally looked at her, and what Chloe saw in his eyes made her tremble. There was no love there. Not even indifference. There was something worse. There was satisfaction. Get out of the car, Chloe. She hesitated. Ryan, please tell me what's going on. I'm pregnant. I can't be walking around in dangerous places. I said get out of the car. The aggressive tone frightened her. Chloe opened the door with trembling hands and got out, leaning on the vehicle for support. It was then that she realized they weren't alone. From behind one of the abandoned warehouses, a female figure emerged. When the woman got closer, Chloe felt the ground disappear from under her feet. It was Jessica, Chloe's best friend. Or at least, she had been until a few months ago, when an inexplicable distance began to grow between them. Jessica started avoiding Chloe's calls, cancelling plans, always having an excuse not to meet. Now, seeing Jessica here, in this isolated place, next to Ryan, everything started to make a terrible kind of sense. Jessica, what are you doing here? Jessica smiled. It wasn't the warm smile Chloe had known since they were teenagers. It was a venomous smile, loaded with something that looked a lot like hatred. Surprised, Chloe. You were always so naive, little Miss Perfect. Chloe looked from Jessica to Ryan, trying to process what was happening. You two, you're together. Ryan put his arm around Jessica's shoulders in a possessive gesture and answered, For 6 months, honey, since before you even found out you were pregnant. The words hit Chloe like punches to the gut. The entire timeline of their relationship began to rearrange itself in her mind. Ryan's sudden outings, the phone calls he took in another room, the coldness he began to show. And Jessica, her friend of years, who knew all her secrets, all her fears. The two people she trusted most in the world had betrayed her in the cruelest way possible. But why? Chloe whispered, tears starting to stream down her face. Why do this to me? I trusted you. I loved you. Why? Jessica took a step forward, her voice thick with old resentment. Because I was tired of living in your shadow, Chloe. Always the good one, always the successful one, always the one who got everything she wanted. Ryan wants me for real, not out of obligation, not because of some unwanted baby. The cruelty of those words cut deep. Chloe instinctively brought her hands to her belly, as if to protect her child from hearing them. "How can you say that? This baby is not to blame for anything. Ryan, do you really feel that way? Is our child unwanted to you?" Ryan looked away for a moment, but Jessica answered for him. "He never wanted this baby, Chloe. You trapped him. But now we're going to show you what it's like to be really trapped." It was then that Chloe noticed Jessica was holding something, a tripod, a camera, and Ryan pulled his phone from his pocket, opening an app Chloe recognized immediately, a live streaming platform. "What are you going to do?" Chloe's voice came out shaky, panic taking over completely. Jessica laughed, a sharp, disturbing sound. "We're going to give you what you've always wanted, Chloe. Attention. We're going to make everyone see you. We're going to show them who you really are." Before Chloe could react, Ryan grabbed her by the arms. She tried to fight back, but her body, heavy with pregnancy, made her slow and vulnerable. Jessica approached with ropes, and together, the two of them began to drag Chloe to a specific spot in the abandoned lot. It was where the old freight train tracks crossed the property, deactivated for years, covered in rust and weeds. Those tracks were a remnant of an industrial past that this part of New Jersey was trying to forget. Chloe screamed, begged, cried, but her pleas only seemed to fuel the sick satisfaction she saw in Jessica's eyes. They forced her to lie down on the cold tracks. Metal was icy against her back, and Chloe could feel every rough patch of rust through her thin dress. Ryan held her wrists while Jessica tied her hands to the rails with thick ropes. They did the same with her ankles. Chloe was completely immobilized, lying on her back, her prominent belly pointing up at the dark night sky. "Please," she sobbed, "please don't do this. Think about the baby. I'm begging you." Jessica set up the camera on the tripod, adjusting the angle to perfectly capture the scene. Ryan started the live stream on his phone, and Chloe watched in horror as within seconds, dozens of viewers were connected, hundreds, thousands. "Hey everyone," Jessica said to the camera with terrifying ease. "Are you seeing what I'm seeing? This here is Chloe, the woman who tried to destroy the love of my life. She got pregnant on purpose to trap my boyfriend, and now she's going to get what she deserves." The comments started popping up on the phone screen, some in shock, others cursing, a few defending Chloe, but most just watching, in silence or with morbid curiosity. The number of viewers kept climbing. "Lying on the tracks," Chloe cried uncontrollably. The humiliation of being exposed like this to thousands of strangers was almost as devastating as the physical fear. Her body trembled, and she could feel the baby moving inside her, as if he too sensed the danger. Ryan approached, crouching beside her. "You brought this on yourself, Chloe. You wanted to trap me with a child I didn't ask for. Now you get to find out what it's like to be really trapped." Chloe looked into his eyes, searching for any trace of the man she had loved, but there was nothing there, only emptiness. The number on the stream kept rising. 5,000 viewers, 10,000, 15,000, and among all those invisible eyes scattered across the virtual world, someone was paying very close attention to the unfolding scene, someone who recognized the surroundings, the buildings in the background, the structure of the old tracks, someone who understood, with a tightening in their chest, exactly where this was happening. "And tell me, what's your opinion of this story, and how do you think it will end?" It was then that Chloe noticed Jessica was holding something, a tripod, a digital camera, and Ryan pulled his phone from his pocket, opening a live streaming app. "What are you going to do?" Chloe's voice came out shaky, panic taking over completely. "Please, you can't do this, whatever it is you're planning." Jessica laughed, a disturbing sound that echoed through the empty space. "We're going to give you what you've always wanted, Chloe. Attention. Now we're going to make everyone really see you. We're going to show them who you really are." "That's not true, and you know it, Jessica." Chloe felt anger mix with her fear. "How can you twist everything like this? I was never like that. You've known me since we were 15. You know who I really am." "I know who you always wanted me to think you were," Jessica retorted, venom in her voice. "But that's over now. Now the whole world is going to see the truth." Before Chloe could react, before her pregnant, slow-moving brain could process what was about to happen, Ryan grabbed her by the arms with a brutal force that made her cry out in pain and surprise. She tried to struggle, tried to use the weight of her belly to unbalance him, tried to scream for help even though she knew there was no one around to hear her. But her body, heavy with pregnancy, her swollen ankles, the physical and emotional exhaustion of the last few months, it all conspired against her. Chloe was slow, heavy, vulnerable in a way she had never been before in her life. Jessica approached with thick nylon ropes, the kind used in construction or for tying down heavy loads. They were rough ropes that scratched Chloe's delicate skin as they made contact with her wrists. Together, Ryan and Jessica began to drag Chloe to a specific spot in the abandoned lot, and only then did she see where she was being taken. It was where the old freight train tracks crossed the abandoned property. The tracks seemed to have been forgotten by time. Covered in rust, with weeds growing between the ties, they were remnants of an abandoned industrial past. They had been decommissioned more than 10 years ago, when the factory went bankrupt. Chloe screamed until her throat was raw, until her voice was hoarse. She begged with words broken by sobs. She cried until she had no tears left. But her pleas only seemed to fuel the sick satisfaction she saw, shining in Jessica's eyes. Ryan at least had the decency not to look directly at her, keeping his face turned to the side like a coward who can't face the consequences of his own actions. They forced her to lie down on the cold tracks. The metal was icy against her back. Ryan held her wrists while Jessica tied her hands to the rails with thick ropes. They did the same with her ankles. Chloe was completely immobilized, her belly pointing up at the dark sky. "Please," she sobbed, her voice breaking in absolute desperation. "Please, don't do this. I'm begging you for the love you once had for me. Think about the baby. My son is not to blame for anything. He's innocent. If you want to hurt me, humiliate me, fine, but leave my baby alone. Please, for the love of God, think about the baby." Jessica crouched down next to Chloe, so close that she could feel her warm breath on her face. "Your baby is going to learn early on that actions have consequences, Chloe. You chose to get pregnant to trap Ryan. Now deal with the consequences." "It wasn't like that," Chloe screamed, frustration and despair mixing in her voice. "We were engaged. Ryan wanted this baby as much as I did. You're twisting everything. You're creating a lie to justify your betrayal." But Jessica had already moved away, rejoining Ryan, who was positioning the tripod with the camera a few feet away, adjusting the angle to perfectly capture the macabre scene. Chloe watched with growing horror as Ryan fiddled with his phone, his fingers sliding across the screen with the familiarity of someone who had planned this down to the smallest detail. He was starting the live stream. Within seconds, the viewer count on the small phone screen began to climb. 10 people, 50, 100, 200. The number grew at a terrifying rate, fed by the mysterious social media algorithms that push shocking content to more and more people. 500, 1,000, 2,000. The stream was spreading like a digital virus, shared by people who didn't even know Chloe, but were drawn in by the morbid promise of live drama, of real-time tragedy, of entertainment at the expense of human suffering. "Hey everyone," Jessica said to the camera with terrifying ease, as if she were a TV host and not a torturer about to commit a heinous act. Her voice was animated, almost cheerful, in grotesque contrast to the horrific scene. "Are you seeing what I'm seeing? This here is Chloe, the woman who tried to destroy the love of my life. She got pregnant on purpose to trap my boyfriend, to force him to stay with her even though she knew he didn't love her anymore. And now she's finally going to understand what it means to be truly trapped. She's going to learn that you don't play with people's feelings." The comments began to flood the phone screen. Chloe couldn't read them all because her vision was blurred by tears and her position, but Ryan read some of them aloud, carefully selecting the cruelest ones to maximize her suffering. "Wow, this is crazy. Is this for real? Someone call the cops. What a psycho. She deserves it for getting pregnant on purpose. Guys, this has to be fake. Where is this? Looks like Jersey. Oh my God, she's pregnant. This can't be real." Some viewers were in shock, others in disbelief. A few even defended Chloe in the comments, but most just watched in silence or with morbid curiosity. The number kept climbing. 5,000, 8,000, 10,000, 15,000. The stream was going viral, being shared in WhatsApp groups, reposted on other social media platforms, commented on in forums and online communities. Lying on the tracks, Chloe felt her body tremble uncontrollably. It wasn't just fear. It was a toxic mix of terror, humiliation, despair, and a sense of unreality. This couldn't be happening. It was impossible that the two people she trusted most in the world were doing this to her. It was impossible that thousands of strangers were watching the worst moment of her life, as if it were entertainment. The public humiliation of being exposed like that to thousands of viewers was almost as devastating as the physical fear. Her body trembled, and she could feel the baby moving inside her with sharp, irregular movements, as if he too sensed the danger, the stress, the terror coursing through his mother's body. Each kick from the baby was a painful reminder of what was at stake, of the innocent life that depended on her and that she couldn't protect. Her breathing was ragged, broken by sobs. Her chest rose and fell with difficulty, and Chloe feared she would have a panic attack right there, tied up and helpless. The emotional pain mingled with the physical discomfort of pregnancy. Her back ached, pressed against the uneven metal of the tracks. Her wrists and ankles burned where the ropes cut off her circulation. Her belly was heavy, compressing her internal organs, making it hard to breathe. And above all, the fear, the absolute paralyzing fear that something would happen to her baby. Ryan and Jessica continued to perform for the camera, creating a distorted narrative where Chloe was the villain and they were the victims of cruel manipulation. They told elaborate lies about how Chloe had poked holes in condoms on purpose, how she had lied about being on birth control, how she had orchestrated the pregnancy to trap Ryan. Every word was a stab to Chloe's heart, not just because they were cruel lies, but because she knew many people watching would believe them. The story Jessica and Ryan told was simple, dramatic, easy to digest. The truth, as always, was more complex and less palatable for the rapid consumption of social media. With every passing minute the suspense grew. Jessica made sure to mention to the camera that these were train tracks, even if they had been decommissioned for years. She planted the seed of fear in the viewers' minds, making them imagine increasingly terrible scenarios. The distant sound of planes taking off from Newark Airport echoed periodically. And each time Chloe flinched, her panicked brain interpreting every sound as the approach of a ghost train that would come to crush her and her child. The uncertainty was as overwhelming as the fear. Were these tracks really decommissioned, or was it possible that some maintenance train still passed through here occasionally? Chloe had no idea, and that ignorance was an additional torture. Her entire body was on high alert, every muscle tense, every sense sharpened to detect the slightest sign of danger. Among the thousands of viewers scattered across the country, and perhaps the world, people from different cities, different states, different realities, someone was paying very close attention to the unfolding scene. Someone who recognized the surroundings by the characteristic shape of the abandoned warehouses, the buildings in the background, the unique structure of the old tracks that cut through that specific region of New Jersey. This person felt their heart clench as they understood with terrible clarity exactly where this was happening. And more importantly, this person recognized Chloe. They knew that face, that voice, that 8.5-month pregnant belly. It was someone moved by the most primitive protective instinct that exists in human nature, the maternal instinct. Sharon, Chloe's mother, was in her modest home in Elizabeth, getting ready for bed after a long day working as a cleaner at a local hospital. She had turned on the TV to watch the nightly news when her teenage niece, Brianna, who lived with her, ran into the room with her phone in her hand, and her face pale with horror. "Aunt Sharon, you have to see this, it's Chloe. Something is really, really wrong." Sharon took the phone, and in seconds, her entire world collapsed. There was her daughter, her Chloe, tied to train tracks, pregnant and terrified, being humiliated by thousands of people on the internet. Maternal instinct overrode any logical reasoning. She immediately recognized the surroundings. Because she had worked years ago in a factory in that same industrial area, she knew every street, every warehouse, every track in that abandoned zone. Without a second thought, Sharon grabbed the keys to her old car, a Chevy Cobalt with more than 15 years on it, but which she kept running with regular maintenance because it was her only means of transport. She didn't even change clothes, leaving the house still in slippers and her hospital scrubs, yelling at Brianna to call the police, the fire department, anyone who could help. Meanwhile, on the live stream, other viewers were also starting to react. A nurse watching from her home in Brooklyn recognized clear signs of physical distress in Chloe. The irregular breathing, the extreme pallor even under the artificial light of the headlights, the involuntary movements that indicated stress contractions. The nurse, whose name was Simone, immediately dialed 911, providing all the details she could glean from the stream. In a rough neighborhood in Newark, a 22-year-old named Lucas was watching the stream with a growing knot in his stomach. He recognized Chloe. 3 years earlier, when Lucas was a troubled teenager involved with the wrong crowd, Chloe, who was then volunteering at a community outreach program, had literally saved his life. She convinced him to get off the streets, helped him get his first job, was the only person who believed in him when everyone else had written him off as a lost cause. Lucas also recognized the location of the stream. It was near where he lived. He grabbed his bike and started pedaling like he had never pedaled before, his heart hammering in his chest, his legs burning with the effort. A night shift security guard making his rounds at one of the few still active warehouses in the area heard muffled screams coming from the direction of the abandoned tracks. At first, he thought it was cats fighting or a homeless person, but something in the tone of those screams made him suspicious. He switched on his powerful flashlight and started walking toward the sound. The net, without Jessica and Ryan realizing it, was slowly beginning to close. Every person who recognized the location, every viewer who decided to act instead of just passively watching, every soul who chose to do the right thing, even when it was easier to look away, they were all converging on that specific point on the outskirts of Elizabeth. Sharon drove like a woman possessed through the dark streets, running yellow lights that turned red, speeding far above the limit, praying aloud every prayer she knew. Her phone, mounted on the dashboard, continued to show the live stream, and every passing second was torture, watching her daughter in that state of desperation without being able to do anything immediately. Back at the tracks, Chloe had entered an almost catatonic state. Her brain, overwhelmed by the trauma, the fear, the humiliation, was beginning to shut down as a defense mechanism. She stared at the night sky without really seeing the stars that were beginning to appear between the dispersing clouds. Her mind wandered to distant memories. She remembered being a child and her mother rocking her to sleep, singing old lullabies. She remembered the first day of college when she met Jessica and thought she had found a friend for life. She remembered the day Ryan proposed, how her heart had exploded with happiness, how she had believed she finally had the family she had always dreamed of. But then the baby kicked hard, a painful kick to the ribs that brought her back to the brutal reality. Chloe looked down at her belly, at that life that depended on her, and something inside her shifted. For the first time that terrible night, something other than fear took hold of her heart. It was anger. It was determination. It was the fiercest maternal instinct that exists, the one that makes a mother capable of anything to protect her child. "I'm not going to let you win," Chloe said, her voice coming out hoarse but firm. "You can tie me up, you can humiliate me, you can try to destroy me, but I'm a mother now, and a mother doesn't give up. A mother doesn't surrender. My son will be born, and he will grow up knowing that his mother fought for him until the very last second." Jessica rolled, her eyes dramatically for the camera. "Oh, look, the big victim speech. How touching. Too bad no one here is buying your act, Chloe." But something in Ryan's expression changed. For a split second, Chloe saw something like doubt cross his face, something like remorse. But it was just a flicker that disappeared as quickly as it appeared. It was then that the first lights appeared on the horizon. Flashlights, car headlights, and sirens. The distant but unmistakable sound of police sirens approaching rapidly. The desperation instantly switched sides. "Jessica, what was that?" Ryan asked, turning sharply toward the approaching sounds. "I don't know," Jessica replied, but her voice no longer sounded so confident. Her face paled as she realized the lights were getting closer, more numerous. "Ryan, I think someone called the cops. We have to go. Now." "What about Chloe?" Ryan asked, looking at the woman tied to the tracks. "Leave her, she can fend for herself." Jessica was already dismantling the tripod with hurried, uncoordinated movements, but for the first time that night, Ryan hesitated. "Jessica, she's pregnant. We can't just leave her tied up here." "Of course we can. Do you want to go to jail?" "Because that's what's going to happen if we're still here when the cops arrive." Jessica grabbed Ryan's arm and pulled him toward the car. They got into the vehicle in a hurry and sped off, tires screeching on the cracked asphalt. The stream was still active, but now the camera was on the ground, showing only a strange angle of the night sky. Thousands of viewers were still watching, many virtually screaming for someone to untie Chloe. And then the first human figure appeared, running toward the tracks. It was Lucas, the young man Chloe had helped years ago. He jumped off his bike while it was still moving and ran to her, pulling a pocket knife he always carried from his pocket. "Chloe, I'm going to cut you loose. Stay calm. You're going to be okay." Lucas began to cut the ropes with trembling but determined hands. Moments later, Sharon arrived. She jumped out of the car before it had even fully stopped and ran to her daughter with an agility that seemed impossible for a 60-year-old woman. "My baby, oh my God, my baby!" She fell to her knees beside Chloe, her tears falling on her daughter's face, as Lucas finished cutting the last ropes. Police cars and an ambulance arrived almost simultaneously, their red and blue lights painting the entire scene with colors of urgency and salvation. Paramedics rushed over with a stretcher, quickly assessing Chloe's condition. Her blood pressure was dangerously high. The baby's heartbeat needed to be monitored immediately. Chloe was finally freed from the tracks, wrapped in thermal blankets, protected by arms that had not betrayed her. The rescue was not just physical, it was emotional, moral, and symbolic. In front of everyone, the truth was beginning to emerge. The police confiscated Jessica's phone, which had been left behind in the hasty escape, ensuring the entire stream was recorded as evidence. The stream was finally shut down, but not before more than 50,000 people had watched it. The story was already spreading to every corner of the internet, being discussed, dissected, analyzed. But this time the prevailing narrative was not the one Jessica and Ryan had tried to create. It was the truth. The truth of a pregnant woman brutally betrayed and humiliated by the two people she trusted most. Inside the ambulance, as paramedics monitored her vital signs and the baby's heartbeat, Chloe held her mother's hand tightly. She was still shaking, still crying, but there was something different in her eyes now. It wasn't just relief at being saved, it was determination. It was the certainty that she had survived the worst and that from here on out, things could only get better. "Mom," she whispered, "I'm going to get through this. For me and for my son. I promise." Sharon kissed her daughter's sweaty forehead. "I know you will, my girl, and I'll be by your side every step of the way." The ambulance sped off with sirens blaring, taking Chloe to the hospital where she would be carefully examined, where the baby would be monitored, where she would begin the long process of physical and emotional healing. Meanwhile, the police launched an intensive search for Jessica and Ryan, whose faces were now known to thousands of people thanks to the livestream. They wouldn't be able to hide for long. The internet never forgets, and justice, though slow, was just beginning to move. That night, Chloe had hit rock bottom of human betrayal and humiliation, but she had also discovered something precious. She had discovered she wasn't alone, that there were people willing to fight for her, to save her, to protect her, and most importantly, she had discovered a strength within herself she never knew she had, the strength of a mother willing to survive the impossible for the sake of the child she carried. This was just the first night of a long journey. The road ahead would be difficult, painful, full of obstacles, but for the first time in months, Chloe had hope that she could walk it to the end. The following days became a blur of medical exams, police statements, and desperate attempts to process the trauma. Chloe spent the first night at Elizabeth General Hospital under constant observation. The doctors were concerned about the impact of the extreme stress on her pregnancy. Her blood pressure took days to normalize, and the baby, though healthy, showed signs of distress on the fetal monitors. Sharon didn't leave her daughter's side for a minute. She slept in an uncomfortable chair next to the hospital bed, waking up at Chloe's every move, every sigh, every nightmare that made her daughter scream in her sleep. Brianna, her teenage niece, came to visit every day after school, bringing words of support and the only flowers they could afford with their tight budget. The story had exploded on social media in a way no one could have predicted. The video of the live stream, though removed from the original platform for violating terms of use, had already been downloaded and reposted thousands of times on various websites and forums. The hashtag that spontaneously appeared in the trending topics brought both messages of support and cruel comments. The entire country seemed divided between those who saw Chloe as a victim of unimaginable cruelty and those who believed the distorted narrative Jessica and Ryan had tried to create. Talk shows invited Chloe for interviews. Lawyers offered to represent her pro bono. Journalists camped outside the hospital trying to get a statement. The case became national news, debated on roundtables, analyzed by psychologists and experts on abusive relationships. Chloe became, against her will, a symbol, for some, of a society that turns tragedy into entertainment, for others, of courage and maternal survival. But far from the spotlight and social media discussions, Chloe was fighting a much more intimate and painful battle. She couldn't sleep without having nightmares. She would wake up screaming, drenched in a cold sweat, feeling the cold metal of the tracks against her back again. She had panic attacks when she saw ropes, or even when she heard the distant sound of a train. The betrayal by Jessica and Ryan had left wounds that no medicine or time seemed able to heal. The hospital psychologist, Dr. Evans, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a calm voice, visited Chloe daily. She explained that the trauma Chloe had suffered was not just emotional, but also physical, etched into her body's memories. It would be a long healing process, especially considering she would have to deal with it all while preparing to give birth. "You need to understand something, Chloe," the psychologist said in one of their sessions. "What happened to you does not define who you are. You were the victim of two deeply disturbed people who chose to hurt you in the cruelest way possible. But you survived, you fought, and that says much more about your strength than anything they tried to do to you." "But I feel so broken," Chloe confessed, tears streaming down her face. "How am I going to be a mother like this? How am I going to take care of a baby when I can barely take care of myself?" "You're not alone," Dr. Evans replied firmly. "You have your mother, your niece, a support network forming around you, and most importantly, you have a strength inside you that you can't even imagine yet. The maternal instinct is one of the most powerful forces in nature. When your son is born, you will find resources within yourself that you never knew existed." Meanwhile, the police investigation was moving quickly. Jessica and Ryan had disappeared right after fleeing that night, but their photos were in every newspaper, on every social media platform, on every TV show. It was impossible to hide when millions of people knew their faces. The public pressure was immense. The case had touched a raw nerve in American society about psychological violence, betrayal, public humiliation, and the ethical limits of social media. The detective in charge of the case, Detective Miller, an experienced man in his 50s with decades on the force, was determined to find them. He put together a special task force, tracking bank transactions, social media conversations, any clue that could lead to the fugitives. The livestream, ironically, had provided irrefutable evidence of the crime. Every second of that broadcast was additional proof of kidnapping, false imprisonment, threats, humiliation, and attempted psychological harm. It took only 5 days to locate them. Jessica and Ryan were hiding in a cheap motel on the border between New Jersey and Pennsylvania, using fake names and paying in cash. But a maid cleaning the room recognized Jessica from the news and alerted the manager, who immediately contacted the police. The arrest was quick and undramatic. Ryan tried to deny everything at first, claiming it was just a prank that got out of hand. Jessica remained completely silent, refusing to speak without a lawyer. When Chloe learned of the arrest, she felt a confusing mix of relief and emptiness. Part of her had expected to feel satisfaction, maybe even joy, at their capture, but all she felt was a deep exhaustion. Their arrest didn't erase the trauma, it didn't undo the betrayal, it didn't heal the wounds. It was just the beginning of a long legal process that would stretch on for months, perhaps years. Chloe was discharged from the hospital after a week. The doctors released her with strict instructions for rest and regular psychological follow-up. Sharon insisted that her daughter come live with her in Elizabeth, at least until the baby was born. The apartment in Queens, where Chloe had lived with Ryan, was filled with painful memories. She needed a fresh start. Sharon's house was small but cozy. 2 modest bedrooms, a simple living room, a kitchen where there was always a pot on the stove. Sharon had turned her sewing room into a small nursery, painting the walls a soft yellow and filling the space with furniture donated by neighbors and colleagues from the hospital where she worked. A restored wooden crib, an old but functional dresser, handmade curtains from a lady at her church. It wasn't luxurious, but it was made with love. For the first few days, Chloe barely left her room. She spent hours lying down, staring at the ceiling, trying to process everything that had happened. She refused visitors except for immediate family. She didn't want to talk about the case, didn't want to watch the news, didn't want to see her face plastered on newspapers and websites. She just wanted to disappear, to become invisible again, but the baby wouldn't let her. With every movement, every kick, he reminded Chloe that life was still growing inside her, regardless of her desire to give up. There was an innocent human being depending on her to survive. And slowly, painfully, that awareness began to pull her back to the surface. It was Brianna who finally managed to get Chloe out of the room. The 16-year-old, with her youthful energy and unwavering determination, simply wouldn't accept her aunt's surrender. She would burst into the room every day, open the curtains, even when Chloe complained, talk about school, about her friends, about anything that could distract her aunt from the spiral of negative thoughts. "Aunt Chloe, you have to get up," Brianna said one day, using the affectionate nickname she'd had for her since childhood. "I know it's hard. I know it hurts so much, but you can't let those two win. You know what would be a victory for them? You giving up, you letting what they did completely destroy you. Don't give them that satisfaction." Her niece's words, spoken with a brutal sincerity that only teenagers can muster, struck a chord with Chloe. She was right. Every day Chloe spent hiding in her room, refusing to live, was a victory for Jessica and Ryan. They wanted to destroy her, and she was letting them succeed even from inside a jail cell. It was in that moment that something shifted. It wasn't a dramatic, instantaneous transformation like in the movies. It was subtle, almost imperceptible. But Chloe made a decision. She was going to survive, not just physically, but emotionally. She was going to rebuild her life, not because it was easy or because the trauma had disappeared, but because she refused to give her tormentors the satisfaction of seeing her completely broken. Chloe began to participate more seriously in her therapy sessions. She agreed to join a support group for women victims of psychological violence, where she found other stories of betrayal, manipulation, and survival. There, surrounded by women who understood her pain because they had lived different versions of the same story, Chloe began to talk. She began to process. She began, slowly, to heal. One of the women in the group, Helen, a woman in her early 40s who had rebuilt her life after a 15-year abusive marriage, became a sort of mentor to Chloe. Helen worked with crafts, making bags and accessories that she sold, at fairs and online. She had an inspiring story of overcoming adversity after years of living under the control of a manipulative husband who made her believe she was incapable of doing anything on her own. Helen had found the strength to leave with her 2 children and start from scratch. She lived in a simple studio apartment, worked day and night sewing her pieces, but she was free. And that freedom was worth more than any material comfort she had left behind. Helen suggested that Chloe try using her graphic design skills to help her create a brand identity for her small business. At first, Chloe hesitated. She didn't feel creative, didn't feel capable of producing anything of value. Her hands trembled when she tried to hold the mouse. Her mind went blank in front of the computer screen. But Helen insisted with patience and kindness, saying there was no rush, that Chloe could go at her own pace, experiment, make mistakes, try again. Eventually, Chloe agreed. It started as a simple distraction, something to occupy her mind during the long afternoons at home when the silence of the empty house became too heavy. The first day, she spent 3 hours just staring at the blank screen of the design program. The second day, she managed a few scribbles, nothing worthwhile. On the third day, something finally began to take shape, a simple, delicate logo that captured the essence of Helen's handmade work. When she showed the result to her mentor, Helen hugged Chloe with tears in her eyes and said it was perfect, that it was exactly what she had dreamed of but never knew how to express. That hug, that validation, that feeling of having created something good and useful was like a balm on Chloe's wounded soul. For the first time in weeks, she felt a flicker of self-worth. She felt that maybe she wasn't completely broken, that maybe there was still something of value inside her, something that the betrayal and humiliation hadn't managed to erase completely. But gradually, as she created logos, chose color palettes, designed packaging, Chloe realized she was rediscovering a part of herself she thought she had lost. The creative part, the part that found beauty and meaning in small things. Each project was like therapy, an exercise in focus and concentration that pulled her, even if just for a few hours, out of the constant rumination about the trauma. One job led to another. Other women from the group asked for help with their small businesses, a baker who needed labels for her cakes, a seamstress who wanted a business card, a manicurist who dreamed of a professional logo. Chloe took on all the jobs, charging symbolic prices or sometimes not charging at all, just happy to be creating again, to be contributing, to be feeling useful. Slowly, her reputation grew. People from outside the group began to seek her out. Small business owners in the neighborhood, friends of friends, acquaintances from the church Sharon attended. The work didn't pay much, but it was enough for Chloe to start saving a little money of her own, so she wouldn't feel completely dependent on her mother. More important than the money was the sense of purpose the work gave her. Each completed project was a small victory against the voice in her head that insisted she was too broken to function, that she would never be the same, that she should give up. The voice was still there, still whispering in moments of weakness, but it was getting fainter, easier to ignore. The pregnancy progressed, and with it came new challenges and new joys. The prenatal appointments became a comforting routine. Dr. Davis, the obstetrician who had been following Chloe since the beginning of her pregnancy, was a kind man who never asked invasive questions about the case that had become national news. To him, Chloe was just another patient, a mother-to-be who needed medical care and emotional support. He adjusted her treatment to account for the psychological trauma, prescribing breathing and relaxation exercises to help with her anxiety. Each ultrasound was a moment of connection with the baby. Seeing that tiny creature moving on the screen, with its minuscule fingers and strong beating heart, reminded Chloe why she was fighting. It wasn't just for her. It was for him. For that innocent being who didn't ask to be born in the midst of all this chaos, but who deserved a chance at a happy and healthy life. Chloe decided not to find out the baby's gender. She wanted it to be a surprise, but deep down, she felt it was a boy. She had no logical explanation, just a mother's intuition. She started calling him Leo in her thoughts, though she hadn't officially decided on a name yet. One day, about a month after the events of that terrible night, Chloe received an unexpected visitor. It was Lucas, the young man who had helped cut her free that night. He showed up at Sharon's house, shy and hesitant, holding a small gift wrapped in colorful paper. "Hey, Chloe, I hope you don't mind me stopping by. I just wanted to see how you were doing. And, well, I brought a little something for the baby." Chloe was surprised and moved. She invited Lucas in, and they talked for hours. Lucas told her how his life had changed since that day Chloe helped him years ago. He had finished high school, gotten a steady job at a mechanic shop, and was saving up for a technical course. He said that what he did that night, saving Chloe, was just a small way of repaying everything she had done for him when he was just a lost teenager. "You saved me when no one else believed in me," Lucas said. "I just did what any decent person would do. But I wanted you to know that you're not alone. There are people who care about you, who want to see you do well." The conversation with Lucas was an important turning point for Chloe. It made her realize that she had sown good things in her life, had made a difference in people's lives, and those seeds were now coming back to her in the form of support and love. It wasn't just Jessica and Ryan who defined her story. There was Lucas, there was Sharon, there was Brianna, there were the women from the support group, there was Helen. There were all those small acts of kindness from strangers who had mobilized that night to save her. Chloe started leaving the house more. She went to craft fairs with Helen, helping to sell products and making contacts for future design work. She went to the park with Brianna, sitting on a bench and watching the children play, imagining what it would be like when her own son was old enough to run and play. She went to church with Sharon sometimes, not because she had suddenly found religion, but because the sense of community in that place was comforting. People sometimes recognized her on the street. Some would look away, not knowing how to react. Others would come up to her, offering words of support, saying they were rooting for her. A few made cruel or invasive comments, repeating the lies that Jessica and Ryan had spread. Chloe learned to ignore them. She learned that she couldn't control what people thought of her. She could only control how she reacted. The legal case against Jessica and Ryan was moving forward. They had been indicted on multiple charges, including kidnapping, false imprisonment, making terroristic threats and invasion of privacy. The district attorney's office was seeking severe penalties, and the case had become a landmark, a legal precedent on the limits of social media and the criminalization of public humiliation. The defense attorneys tried to argue it was just a prank that got out of control, but the evidence was too overwhelming. Chloe would eventually have to testify, to face Jessica and Ryan face-to-face in a courtroom. The thought terrified her, but her lawyer, a dedicated man named Mr. Harrison, who had taken the case pro bono, assured her she would have all the support she needed. He would prepare her for cross-examination, help her stay strong in the face of the defense's questions. But all of that seemed distant compared to the immediate reality of her pregnancy nearing its end. Chloe was now 38 weeks along and could go into labor at any moment. Her belly was huge, her feet didn't fit into any shoes, her back ached constantly. But she had never felt more alive. Every physical discomfort was a reminder that she was creating life, that soon she would hold her son in her arms. Sharon had prepared everything for the baby's arrival. The hospital bag had been packed for weeks, always by the door. The nursery was immaculate, with every piece of clothing washed and carefully folded. Brianna had made a handmade mobile to hang over the crib, full of colorful felt stars that danced in the breeze. One evening, Chloe was sitting in the living room, watching an old movie with her mother, when she felt the first contraction. It wasn't strong, just a tightening in her lower abdomen that lasted a few seconds and then passed. She said nothing, thinking it might be just another one of those false alarms she had experienced in recent weeks. But 20 minutes later, another one came, and then another, and Chloe knew. It was time. Her son was ready to be born, and she, despite all the fear and uncertainty, was ready to meet him. The worst was over. Now came the most beautiful part, the beginning of a new life. Literally. "Mom, I think it's time," Chloe said, trying to keep her voice calm though her heart was racing. "The contractions are coming regularly." Sharon leaped from the sofa with an agility impressive for someone her age. "Brianna, get the hospital bag," she yelled, already putting on her shoes and looking for the car keys. "Chloe, breathe deep, honey. We'll get there in time, don't worry." The drive to the hospital seemed both endless and too fast. Chloe breathed deeply through each contraction, counting the seconds as the nurse had taught in the birthing classes. Sharon drove with a firm grip on the steering wheel, but Chloe could see the nervousness in her mother's eyes in the rearview mirror. Brianna, in the back seat next to Chloe, held her hand and whispered words of encouragement. When they arrived at the maternity ward, Chloe was immediately taken to a labor room. The medical team examined her and confirmed she was 5 centimeters dilated. Labor had truly begun. There was no turning back now. In the next few hours, she would meet her son. The labor was long and exhausting. Chloe went through moments of intense pain, where she thought she couldn't go on, where she wanted to give up, where she screamed that she couldn't take it anymore. But Sharon was there, holding her hand, wiping her sweat, whispering that she was strong, that she could do it, that soon it would all be worth it. Dr. Fernandez, the on-call obstetrician who took over the case with Dr. Davis, was an experienced and compassionate woman who guided Chloe through each stage of labor with patience and firmness. During the hours of that early morning, as she fought to bring her son into the world, Chloe thought about everything she had been through to get there. She thought about the betrayal, the humiliation, the fear she felt tied to those cold tracks. She thought about how she had hit emotional rock bottom, how she had felt broken and worthless. But she also thought about how she had survived, how she had found strength where she thought there was none left, how she had rebuilt, piece by piece, a new version of herself. And now, as her body labored in the most primitive and fundamental work of humanity, Chloe realized that this was the final proof of her survival. She hadn't just survived the trauma. She had thrived despite it. She was here, about to give birth, about to become a mother, about to start a new chapter of her life where the past, however painful, would be just that. The past. After 11 hours of labor, at 7:43 a.m. on a sunny Thursday in April, the baby was finally born. Healthy boy, 7 pounds 2 ounces, with strong lungs that announced his arrival to the world with a vigorous cry. Dr. Fernandez placed the baby on Chloe's chest, and in that moment, as she looked at her son's red, scrunched-up face, Chloe felt an explosion of love so intense she thought her heart would burst. "Hello, my love," she whispered, tears streaming freely down her face. "I'm your mommy, and I'm going to love you forever." The baby stopped crying when he heard her voice, the voice that had been his constant companion for 9 months in the womb. His tiny eyes tried to open, searching for his mother's face, and in that instant, Chloe knew that everything had been worth it. Every pain, every tear, every sleepless night, every moment of despair. It had all led to this moment, to this perfect, innocent being she now held in her arms. Sharon was crying her eyes out, repeatedly kissing Chloe's forehead. "My daughter, my grandson, you're okay. Thank God you're okay." Brianna was taking pictures with her phone, capturing every moment of that magical morning. Chloe decided to name the baby Leo Peter, in honor of Lucas, the young man, who had helped save her that terrible night. The name Peter meant rock, foundation, and that was exactly what this baby represented for Chloe. The rock on which she would rebuild her life, the foundation of a new and better future. The days that followed were a chaotic mix of dirty diapers, feedings every 3 hours, sleepless nights, and a profound happiness Chloe had never experienced before. Being a mother was harder than she had imagined. It was physically and emotionally exhausting. But it was also the most rewarding thing she had ever done. Every one of Leo's smiles, even if just a reflex in the early days, every time he grabbed her finger with his tiny hand, every time he calmed down at the sound of her voice, it all filled Chloe's heart with a purpose she never knew she was looking for. Sharon was a present and devoted grandmother. She took 2 weeks off from her hospital job to help Chloe in the first few days with the baby. She taught her daughter how to give baths, how to change diapers, how to identify the different types of cries. She would wake up in the middle of the night, when Leo cried, preparing bottles of breast milk that Chloe had pumped, allowing her daughter a few precious hours of sleep. Brianna, in turn, became the most doting aunt a baby could have. She would rush home from school every day just to hold Leo, make funny faces at him, and take millions of pictures to post on social media. Chloe's story continued to be followed by the media and on social media. Leo's birth was reported as a happy ending to a story that had shocked the nation. Headlines spoke of overcoming adversity, of maternal strength, of justice being served. Chloe received hundreds of messages of support from people she had never met, women who had gone through similar traumas, and saw her as an inspiration. But Chloe didn't want to be an inspiration to anyone. She didn't want to be a symbol or an example. She just wanted to be a mother. She wanted to focus on raising her son as best she could, on building a quiet, happy life away from the spotlight. She stopped giving interviews, stopped responding to messages from journalists, and deactivated her social media for a while. She needed peace. She needed normalcy. The trial of Jessica and Ryan concluded 3 months after Leo's birth. It was swift by American standards, thanks to public pressure and irrefutable evidence. Chloe had to appear in court to testify, and that was one of the hardest days of her life. Seeing Jessica and Ryan again, even separated by a courtroom, even in handcuffs and escorted by bailiffs, still made her heart race and her palms sweat. Jessica glared at her with hatred throughout the testimony. She showed no remorse, no shame for what she had done. In her statement, she insisted it was just a joke, that Chloe was being overly dramatic, that she was exaggerating everything to gain public sympathy. Her words were so distorted, so disconnected from reality, that even her own lawyer seemed embarrassed. Ryan, on the other hand, seemed smaller somehow, weaker. He avoided looking at Chloe during her testimony. When it was his turn to speak, he offered a generic apology, said he regretted it, that he had been influenced by Jessica. It was a pathetic defense, a desperate attempt to reduce his sentence by throwing all the blame on his former lover. The judge didn't buy it. Neither did the jury. The sentence was severe. Jessica was sentenced to 8 years in prison for kidnapping, false imprisonment, making terroristic threats, and invasion of privacy. Ryan received 6 years for the same crimes, his sentence slightly reduced for having shown some, albeit questionable, remorse. Both would have to pay substantial damages to Chloe. The decision was met with applause in the courtroom. Chloe didn't applaud. She just took a deep breath and let the tears fall. When she left the courthouse, surrounded by her mother, her niece, and Mr. Harrison, Chloe gave a brief statement to the press waiting outside. It was the last time she would speak publicly about the case. Justice was served today, she said, her voice trembling slightly but firm. Not because of the sentence, although that's important, but because I survived, because I'm standing here with my son waiting for me at home. Jessica and Ryan tried to destroy me. They tried to make me an example of public humiliation, but they failed. Today, I am stronger than they could ever imagine, and I hope my story can help other women who are going through situations of abuse, betrayal, or manipulation. You are not alone. You can survive. You will survive. Chloe's words spread quickly, shared millions of times on social media, quoted in articles, used in awareness campaigns about psychological violence. But Chloe was no longer paying attention to any of it. She had said what she needed to say. Now it was time to truly move on. The following months brought significant changes. Chloe decided to move out of the New York metro area. The big city, with all its painful memories, was no longer where she wanted to raise Leo. With the settlement money and her savings from her design work, she was able to rent a small but charming house in the Catskills, a scenic mountain region a couple of hours from the city. Sharon, who was close to retirement, decided to move with them. Brianna would stay in Elizabeth to finish high school, but would visit every weekend. The house in the Catskills was perfect. It had 2 bedrooms, a spacious living room with a fireplace, a cozy kitchen, and a small garden where Leo could play when he got older. The town was quiet, with fresh air and a welcoming community. It was exactly the fresh start Chloe needed. She officially launched her small graphic design business, working remotely for clients across the country. She wasn't making a fortune, but she earned enough to live comfortably and still have time to care for Leo. Helen, her mentor from the support group, had become a dear friend and business partner. They collaborated on projects, with Helen handling the handmade aspects and Chloe the branding. Chloe also started teaching basic graphic design classes to vulnerable women through a local non-profit. It was her way of giving back for all the help she had received. Teaching these women to have an independent source of income, to believe in their own creative abilities, was incredibly rewarding. Leo grew fast and healthy. At 6 months, he was already letting out contagious laughs that filled the house with joy. At 9 months, he started crawling, exploring every corner of the new house with insatiable curiosity. Chloe documented every milestone with photos and videos she sent to Brianna and close friends. Watching her son grow up happy and safe was the greatest reward she could have. It was in the Catskills that Chloe met Daniel. He was the town veterinarian, a 35-year-old man with a kind smile and eyes that showed a depth of experience and overcome pain. Daniel had lost his wife in a car accident 3 years prior, and since then had focused completely on his work and caring for his 2 dogs. They met when Chloe brought in an injured stray kitten she had found in her garden. Their friendship grew slowly, naturally. Daniel often stopped by Chloe's house to check on the kitten, which Leo had insisted on adopting and naming Patches. The visits became longer. Coffee chats turned into occasional dinners. Daniel was patient, respectful, never pushing for anything more than friendship. He knew Chloe's story. Everyone in town did. But he never treated her like a victim or a curiosity. To him, she was just Chloe, an interesting woman with an adorable son and a smile that lit up any room when it appeared, however rarely. It took almost a year for Chloe to allow her feelings for Daniel to develop into something more than friendship. She had built high walls around her heart, walls that were necessary for her own protection. But Daniel was patient. He didn't try to tear down the walls by force. He was simply there, consistently present, consistently reliable, proving with actions and not just words that he was worthy of her trust. The first kiss happened on a winter afternoon, with Leo asleep in his stroller as they walked through a state park. It was sweet and shy, full of promise, but without any rush. And for the first time since the betrayal, Chloe allowed herself to believe that maybe she could love again, that maybe she deserved to be loved again. Daniel was introduced to Leo gradually, always with care and attention to the baby's cues. But Leo, with that inexplicable wisdom children sometimes have, seemed to accept Daniel immediately. He would smile when Daniel arrived, hold out his little arms to be picked up, and sleep peacefully when Daniel rocked him. It was as if, somehow, he knew this man was safe, was good, was someone they could trust. Chloe and Daniel's relationship blossomed slowly but with deep roots. They were in no hurry. Neither of them wanted to repeat past mistakes. Neither was willing to build something on a fragile foundation. They talked for hours about everything, from philosophy to cake recipes. They shared their fears, their scars, their hopes for the future. It was a relationship built on mutual respect, genuine admiration, and a deep understanding that they had both suffered and survived, and that made them stronger together. Sharon completely approved of the relationship. She saw how Daniel treated her daughter with kindness and respect, how attentive he was with Leo, how he made Chloe happy in a way she hadn't seen in years. Brianna, when she visited on weekends, joked that she finally had a cool uncle. 2 years after the events of that terrible night on the tracks, Chloe was sitting on her porch, watching Leo play in the garden under the afternoon sun. He was 2 now, a talkative and curious little boy who asked 1,000 questions about everything. Daniel was with her, his hand intertwined with hers, both in a comfortable silence as they watched the child chase butterflies. "Did you ever think we'd be here?" Daniel asked softly. "After everything we've been through, after all the pain, did you imagine we could be here, in this moment, so at peace?" Chloe thought about the question. She thought about who she was 2 years ago, that broken woman tied to train tracks thinking her life was over. She thought about the entire journey she had taken since then, all the obstacles she had overcome, all the nights she had cried herself to sleep, all the days she had woken up and chosen to keep going, even when giving up seemed easier. "No," she answered honestly. "I didn't. There were times I thought I'd never be happy again. That night had destroyed everything I was and everything I could ever be. But I was wrong. It didn't destroy me. It transformed me. It made me stronger. It taught me that I can survive the impossible. And it brought me here to this moment with you and with my son. So no, I didn't imagine it. But I'm incredibly grateful that it's real." Daniel kissed her hand gently. "Me too." Leo ran up to them at that moment, holding a flower he had picked from the garden. "Mommy, for you," he said with his sweet little smile that always melted Chloe's heart. She took the flower, hugged her son, and in that perfect moment under the afternoon sun in the Catskills, Chloe finally let go of the weight of the past completely. Jessica and Ryan were in prison, paying for their crimes. The story they tried to create about her had been debunked. The world knew the truth, but more important than all of that, Chloe had built a new life. A good life. Her life. The tracks that had almost trapped her that terrible night now symbolized something different. No longer the trap, but the turning point, the moment she hit bottom and decided to fight her way back to the surface. And now, 2 years later, she wasn't just back on the surface. She was soaring. Chloe looked at Leo, at Daniel, at the cozy house that had become her home, at the future full of possibilities that stretched out before her. And for the first time in a long time, she smiled with genuine, complete joy. The journey had been painful, but it had been worth every step, because it led her here, to this moment of peace, of love, of renewed hope. Chloe's life was just truly beginning, and this time she was in control. This time she was choosing the path, and the path she chose was one of love, of healing, of forgiving herself, and of an unshakable determination to be the best possible mother for the son who had saved her life by giving her a purpose when she needed it most. The tracks were in the past. The future was in her own hands. And it was a bright one. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Chloe and Leo has touched your hearts deeply. If you were moved by this journey of overcoming, of pain transformed into strength, of betrayal that became liberation, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments what marked you most in this story. Was at the moment of the rescue, the birth of Leo, the new beginning in the Catskills? Share your thoughts with us. Every day we bring intense stories like this one, narratives that reveal the deepest side of the human soul, that show how we are capable of surviving the impossible and flourishing even after the greatest tragedies. Each story is a lesson in resilience, in love, in the strength that exists within each of us. We'll see you in the next episode with a new story that will touch your soul. Until then, remember, no matter how dark the night, there is always a dawn waiting for you.